For more than a full century now, gangster flicks have managed to captivate and entertain moviegoers worldwide. The most defining movies of the genre probably don't need an introduction. The Godfather, Goodfellas, we've all seen or at least heard about them. But what about the gangster movies that don't have the Italian mob taking center stage? The ones that were made far away from Hollywood and the US altogether. At around the same time that Don Corleone made Jack Walt an offer he couldn't refuse, Japan was going through its own gangster flick revolution. Following the Second World War, the land of the rising sun witnessed the birth of a new breed of directors, some of which enjoyed worldwide respect and success. And some of those directors just so happened to get their big break by making movies about their country's very own criminals, the Yakuza. From the early 1950s until the early 90s, industry giant Toei produced a total of 252 Yakuza-related films. Safe to say, these movies were incredibly popular for a while. Today, we will take a look at Japan's post-war film industry, how the Yakuza movie genre became a cultural phenomenon, how some of the genre's most important directors got their start in the industry, and how the actual Yakuza themselves were at times heavily involved in the business of filmmaking. If you end up enjoying this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe even check out my Patreon if you want. So, without any further ado, this is the story of the Yakuza and the Japanese film industry. As Japan slowly regained its confidence following a bitter defeat in World War II, there were 4 major studios, in particular, that took over the reins of the Japanese film industry: Toho, Daiei, Shin Toho, and Shochiku. Today, only 2 of these studios remain, namely Toho and Shochiku. I think Toho especially should seem familiar, even to non-Japanese movie enthusiasts. If you've ever seen a Ghibli movie, one of Kurosawa Akira's masterpieces, or Godzilla, you might be well acquainted with the studio's iconic logo animation. In the 1950s, however, a 5th studio entered the fray. Toei, founded in 1951, was a studio that was established in order to create period pieces, set mainly during the Edo period and the early 20th century. Most of these movies obviously featured samurai, but every now and then a Yakuza character would find his way into these movies as well. This actually wasn't the first time that Japanese gangsters were portrayed in movies though. Even during the silent film era, Bakuto or gamblers, which were the precursors to the modern Yakuza, were portrayed as Robin Hood style heroes on the big screen. One notable example, of course, would be Shimizu no Jirocho, probably the first Yakuza boss to become a folk hero in Japan. The earliest movie about Jirocho dates all the way back to 1911. Even the master himself, Kurosawa Akira, portrayed the Yakuza in his 1948 movie Drunken Angel. This movie is probably the first depiction of the post-war black market controlling Yakuza that eventually turned into the modern crime syndicates that we usually think of nowadays. The movie itself, however, is a lot different than the Yakuza-themed movies that would become all the rage, starting around a decade later. The Yakuza genre really took off starting in 1961, when one of the aforementioned 4 major studios, Shin Toho, went out of business. With a huge chunk of the market now up for grabs, Toei took the opportunity and formed New Toei, a production company which gave young assistant directors the chance to get their own projects off the ground, while allowing Toei to pump out even more movies. New Toei was not only a financial success, but it also kickstarted the careers of 2 young directors who would transform the Yakuza film genre and with it, Japanese cinema: Sato Chunya and Fukasaku Kinji. Taking a look at the early lives of both Sato Chunya and Fukasaku Kinji, it is perhaps not all that surprising that these 2 guys in particular would go on to create the blueprint for what a Yakuza movie should be. Both of them grew up during the difficult, violent post-war era of Japan, which saw the land of the rising sun occupied by its biggest enemy during the war. Both of them had first-hand experience with the black markets that suddenly sprung up all over Japan, as well as the gangs and gangsters that controlled the markets, the Yakuza. Sato Jr. was hired by Toei in 1956, right after graduating from Tokyo University with a degree in French literature. In 1963, Sato was allowed to direct his very first feature film at the new Toei production company, which was under a lot of pressure to basically mass produce as many movies as possible in order not to fall behind its competition. Sato saw this as a golden opportunity to create a movie that explored some topics that might have been taboo under different circumstances. Rikugun Sangyaku Monogatari, or Tale of Army Brutality, was all about the inhumane treatment and training that new recruits of the Japanese army had to experience during World War II. The movie, and even its official poster, were controversial, but also earned him a lot of respect and attention, as well as the Blue Ribbon Best Newcomer Award. When Sato was about to take on the Yakuza genre for the first time in 1967, it was clear that his version of a gangster movie would go into quite a different direction than the ones that came before it. No more portraying Yakuza bosses as Robin Hood-like heroes with the highest of all moral standards. Sato's Yakuza characters would be power-hungry, violent criminals with close ties to Japan's right-wing politicians. In other words, they would be realistic. The Organized Crime trilogy of movies is notable for a few reasons. For example, the third movie's main character, a war veteran turned Yakuza, is undoubtedly a bad person and not your typical protagonist. He runs a prostitution ring and a protection racket, and even has a torture chamber used to extract money from indebted businessmen, all while teaming up with an unhinged gangster played by Ando Noboru, who was himself an actual Yakuza boss in real life. The scar on his face is just as real as his criminal background, by the way. As for the actor portraying the main character of Organized Crime 3, that's Sugawara Bunta. In the 50s, Sugawara dropped out of Waseda University after failing to pay his tuition. He then ended up in the modeling business before landing a job as an actor at Shin Toho. Shin Toho, of course, went bankrupt in 1961, which was bad news for Sugawara, who then basically had to start his acting career all over. Thanks to a recommendation by Ando Noboru, he was hired by Toei in 1967 and got to be part of the successful Organized Crime trilogy. Until his death in 2014, Sugawara Bunta made almost 200 movies, many of them being Yakuza movies. Sugawara's story also gives me a chance to smoothly transition into talking about yet another influential director that he had the honor of working with, and the one that managed to turn him into a nationwide superstar. Fukasaku Kinji. At Toei Studios, Fukasaku pumped out movies at a rapid pace. When he joined Toei in 1961, he directed a total of 5 short movies in just 1 year. In 1962, he directed The Proud Challenge, a movie about a Japanese company that illegally sells weapons in Southeast Asia, with a little help from the CIA. In short, the movie is a criticism of how the Americans used a weakened post-war Japan in order to fight a war against communism and the left. Fair to say, the movie's plot did not sit well with some of the conservative higher-ups at Toei, and Fukasaku was banned from making movies for 6 months following the movie's release. Fukasaku might never have found his way into the Yakuza movie genre if it wasn't for a corporate restructuring inside Toei. Basically, the Kyoto branch of the company would be tasked with making exclusively samurai period drama, while Tokyo, where Fukasaku was located, was responsible for producing the studio's Yakuza movies. Much like Sato Jr., Fukasaku aimed to make a Yakuza movie that steered away from the old formula, which was reflected in his 1972 film Street Mobster. Street Mobster is reportedly based on the life of a real gangster from Fukasaku's hometown of Mito, capital of Ibaraki Prefecture. This project will also be the first of many collaborations between Fukasaku and Sugawara Bunta, who portrays a deplorable gangster, born on the exact day that Japan surrendered to the Allied forces. While rising through the ranks of Japan's underworld, he finds himself constantly held back by the bigger, more established gangs in the country. Again, with this movie, Fukasaku is trying to comment on the cultural and political changes brought in by the American occupation 2 decades earlier. While Street Mobster was certainly a success, both critically and commercially, it would be the next Sugawara and Fukasaku collaboration that had a huge impact on both the genre and Japanese cinema. If you want to get into the Yakuza subgenre yourself, Battles Without Honor and Humanity, alternatively known as the Yakuza Papers, would probably be my first recommendation. The main character, Shozo, played by Sugawara, tries his luck on the post-war black markets of Hiroshima and eventually ends up joining the Yakuza. The gang, however, is filled with greedy and toxic gangsters, who eventually manage to get even the few good people that are part of the organization into trouble. Much like Street Mobster, Battles Without Honor and Humanity draws inspiration from real-life characters and events, based on interviews with an imprisoned Yakuza boss from Hiroshima. There is also a noticeable lack of things like codes of honor and traditions in Fukasaku's no-bullshit representation of the modern post-war Yakuza. The Yakuza traditions are even mocked, in a way. One scene shows a few of the gang's members attempting to cut off one of the members' little fingers, with not the slightest clue of how to actually conduct a finger-cutting ceremony. It's only when their boss's wife comes to the rescue that they are finally able to properly remove the finger, as Yakuza tradition demands. Battles Without Honor and Humanity was a huge success and got a total of 7 sequels, all directed by Fukasaku, as well as 3 additional sequels made by different directors in 1979, 2000 and 2003 respectively. But don't let that intimidate you. Simply watching the first installment of the series will surely be a satisfying movie experience for most. In the 70s, the Yakuza genre became so popular that even Hollywood seemingly took note. 1974 saw the release of The Yakuza, a crime drama directed by Sidney Pollack and written by Paul Schrader, the same guy who wrote Martin Scorsese's masterpiece Taxi Driver. Alongside the legendary Ken Takakura, Robert Mitchum stars as a retired detective who goes to Japan in order to rescue his friend's daughter, who was kidnapped by, well, the Yakuza. It's actually a really good movie. As for Fukasaku, while pumping out sequel after sequel to his beloved franchise, he also managed to cram in a few more notable works, like 1975's Graveyard of Honor. But by the late 70s, he was done with making Yakuza flicks. He went on to make some pretty decent samurai movies, and even dipped his toe into the sci-fi genre at one point. The peak of his decades-long career as a director, however, came in 2000 with the release of Battle Royale, a movie which is considered to be one of, if not the greatest movie in the history of Japanese cinema. But don't take my word for it. Listen to what Quentin Tarantino had to say about this one.
Is my favorite movie of the last 17 years, and that is the Japanese film Kinji Fukasaku's Battle Royale. If there was any movie that has been made since I've been making movies that I wish I had made, it's that one.
Throughout the 80s, though, the Yakuza subgenre experienced a bit of a decline. Not in terms of how many movies were made, but the quality of Yakuza movies coming out of Japanese production studios certainly left much to be desired. There are surely countless nuances to how this decline in quality came to be, but without a doubt, the actual Yakuza themselves had a hand in setting up the eventual downfall of the genre. To regular viewers of my channel, the relationship between the Japanese criminal underworld and big Japanese companies and the entertainment industry is nothing new. Nintendo, Sega, Konami, Pride FC, they all have at least some kind of shared history with the Yakuza. Harmless in some cases, not so harmless in other cases. While exploring the history and lives of some of the country's biggest crime syndicates and bosses, we also found out that the Yakuza's ties to the entertainment industry go back a long way. Gangs organizing big events, bosses acting as managers for the country's most significant superstars, you name it. So of course the movie industry wouldn't escape the fate of getting involved with crime in one form or another. Add to that the fact that the biggest studios in the industry got involved with business far away from the lights and the cameras. Toei, who were at the forefront of making movies about the Yakuza, got involved with both the construction and real estate businesses, both of which belong to the bread and butter of the post-war criminals of Japan. Hard evidence of the Yakuza creeping their way into the higher ranks of Toei studios have never been presented by anyone. However, Fukasaku himself offers a hint, saying, quote, "A big producer there named Shundo Koji had been in the Yakuza. Whether this is true or not is hard to confirm, but Shundo was a producer on Battles Without Honor and Humanity, meaning that Fukasaku was probably pretty close to the guy. Fukasaku also recalled a meeting with an actual gang boss at one point. Quote, "There was the godfather of one gang who was portrayed in one of my films by Tanba Tetsuro. He wanted to check it out before it was released, so he set up a screening at Toei. He came, sat there, and watched the film. Afterwards, he remarked that he was a little surprised that his subordinates, some of the men he'd brought with him, were so quiet during the film that they didn't even attempt any retaliation in response to what they were seeing on screen. That was a bit scary." After searching through collaborations between Fukasaku and Tanba Tetsuro, I think there is only one movie that fits the bill, namely the third part of the Battles Without Honor and Humanity series, called Proxy War. Tanba's character in the movie goes by the name Akashi Tatsuo, which certainly isn't a prominent name among the Yakuza that I was able to find any further information on, but it might just be some local boss that no one has ever heard of. In terms of actors that got involved with the criminal underworld, we don't have to look very hard. The aforementioned Ando Noboru was a big part of Toei during the 60s and 70s, even going as far as writing, producing, and acting in a series of movies about his former gang, the Andogumi. The Shibuya-based Andogumi, at its peak, had around 500 members, before being dissolved following a 6-year prison sentence given to Ando Noboru. In an interview with movie critic Mark Schilling, Ando remarked how similar the words Yakuza and Yakuza, meaning actor, were, while also stating that all Yakuza have to be actors to survive. In an interview with the Japan Times in 2003, superstar Sugawara Bunta said, and I quote, "I had Yakuza friends, not just Ando, but guys who were still gangsters. We used to go drinking together." The Yakuza quickly realized that by directly getting involved in the production of movies about them, they could basically create their own propaganda and steer the negative public opinion in another direction. For an example, look no further than 1973's Yamaguchi-gumi Sandaime, and its 2 sequels made at the request of the biggest gang in the history of Japan, the Yamaguchi-gumi. Starring Sugawara Bunta and Ken Takakura, the movies follow the autobiography of Taoka Kazuo, the third boss of the Yamaguchi-gumi. The movie was a huge box office success, apparently even surpassing the first Battles Without Honor and Humanity. The director, Kosaku Yamashita, allegedly became so close with Taoka Kazuo during production, they considered themselves to be brothers. The gangsters having a hand in the production of movies soon triggered the downfall of the genre. The Yakuza felt that the more negative and critical representation that they received in some movies from the early 70s was damaging to their image. Almost as quickly as Fukasaku and Sato were able to do away with the uninspired old ways of creating movies about Japan's underworld, Yakuza movies started to go back to cliches and romanticized versions of the crime syndicates. Japanese audiences were seemingly not interested in paying to watch what was basically Yakuza propaganda. Starting in the 80s, most Yakuza movie productions didn't even make it to the big screen anymore, primarily being released on home video. In the early 90s, Toei saw the writing on the wall and almost completely abandoned the genre. There was perhaps no better time to stop making Yakuza movies. After being accepted by the public for many decades, the people of Japan were finally fed up with the Yakuza by the early 90s, following a string of incidents and gang wars that got the public a bit more involved than what was deemed acceptable. This was also reflected in the Crime Countermeasures Act from 1991, which slowly started to introduce stricter laws against Japan's crime syndicates. But while it may have seemed like the genre was done for, at least in the eyes of Toei, a new and exciting wave of Yakuza movies was already on the horizon, spearheaded by one man in particular, Kitano Takeshi. Summarizing Kitano Takeshi's career is a daunting task. The guy basically did everything you could do in the entertainment industry. He was a comedian, actor, and director. Despite hating them with a passion, he helped produce a video game in 1986 that was pretty much meant to be punishingly difficult and basically unplayable.
たけしの挑戦状新発売台頭
That same year, his game show Takeshi's Castle became a smash hit, captivating not only Japanese audiences, but viewers worldwide. Kitano Takeshi is a jack of all trades and a master of them all. And most importantly, at least in the context of this video, he managed to revive the Yakuza movie genre that was in dire need of a revival. Kitano Takeshi was born in 1947 in Tokyo's Adachi district. While denying ever actually being part of a gang, he also claims to have lived like a Yakuza, further stating that in his neighborhood, children looked up to both baseball players and the Yakuza. He entered Meiji University in order to study engineering, before dropping out at age 19. A few years later, in the early 70s, he formed a comedy duo along with Kaneko Kiyoshi. Under the stage names Beat Takeshi and Beat Kiyoshi, they quickly gained nationwide fame for their risque and sometimes controversial material, which eventually earned Kitano a 5-year ban from NHK, one of Japan's biggest TV stations. He saw no other choice but to continue his career solo. He also made no secret of regularly drinking with Yakuza members, which inspired him to portray the gangsters that he looked up to as a child in his comedy routines. His acting career began with 1983's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, a movie that starred none other than the legendary David Bowie. Kitano's role was unlike anything that the public up until this point had come to expect from him. He played a sergeant inside a Japanese POW camp, a role that required no comedic prowess whatsoever. Kitano himself recalled sneaking into a showing of the movie in order to see the audience's reaction to him taking on a more serious role. He was shocked to discover that the audience started laughing uncontrollably at his on-screen appearance, still seeing Kitano as a comedian and nothing else. After a few more roles that saw him go back to his comedic roots, he got his big break in 1989. He was about to star as the main character of the Fukasaku Kinji movie, Violent Cop. When Fukasaku suddenly pulled out of directing the film, Kitano, with no experience whatsoever, took over directing duties, while also heavily rewriting the script. Violent Cop, a movie about a troubled police detective who doesn't hold back when it comes to using a healthy dose of violence against criminals, was a massive success at the box office and with critics. Basically overnight, Kitano became the most promising creative mind in Japanese cinema. He followed up Violent Cop with 2 more movies, Boiling Point and A Scene at the Sea. But it would be his 4th movie titled Sonatin that would propel him to international fame. Funnily enough, this movie was not well liked in Japan upon its release, but overseas it was considered to be a masterpiece. Sonatin is about a Yakuza member who is inches away from retirement when his boss sends him and a few of his men to Okinawa in order to resolve a dispute between 2 Yakuza clans. Before they are able to find out what's really going on down in Okinawa, the gangsters desperately try to kill time in a beach house owned by one of the members' brothers. It's kind of a weird movie, one that I think you either love or hate. I can kind of understand why the Japanese audience didn't take kindly to this one at first. But then again, there's enough people who consider Sonatin to be one of Kitano's best movies. So maybe it's best to just check it out yourself. Remember that these movies came out at a time when the Yakuza movie genre was considered to be dead. Kitano's fresh new ideas basically revived the genre. 1997's Hanabi was yet another critical darling, and with Brother, released in 2000, Kitano made a movie outside of Japan for the first time in his life. More recently, starting in 2010, he made a whole trilogy of ultra-violent Yakuza movies that were considered to be some of his best work in years. He also landed a major role in the aforementioned Battle Royale by Fukasaku Kinji, and much like Fukasaku himself, Kitano dipped his toe into making samurai movies, with Satoichi, released in 2003, and Kubi, released in 2023, which is also supposed to be his final movie. Now, while Kitano Takeshi is certainly the most noteworthy Yakuza movie director of the 90s and beyond, directors such as Miike Takashi and Sakamoto Junji definitely deserve to be mentioned alongside Kitano for keeping the genre alive. In 1992, Itami Chuzo, director of the legendary Tampopo, came out with a movie like no one had ever seen before. Minbo, The Gentle Art of Japanese Extortion, starring Itami's own wife, is a movie that's basically a parody of the Yakuza, making the gangsters look straight up foolish and ridiculous. Minbo was a huge success, a success that came with a price. Following the movie's release in 1992, as Itami was entering his home in Tokyo, he was attacked by a group of gangsters that slashed his face with a knife. The culprits later turned out to be members of the Gotogumi Yakuza gang, an affiliate of the Yamaguchi-gumi. During his 8-day stay in the hospital following the attack, Itami released a letter to the public, reading, "Yakuza must not be allowed to deprive us of our freedom through violence and intimidation. And this is the message of my movie." What worries me most about this incident is that people might think that the Yakuza really are scary. It would be a shame if people were disheartened just when the public is beginning to stand up against organized crime. Itami continued to have a successful career over the next few years. Behind the scenes though, the director's life would never be quite the same. At the screening of his next movie, a right-wing protester slashed the screen, motivated by Izumi's ongoing public criticism of the Yakuza. When asked about releasing another movie about the criminal underworld, he said, quote, "If I were to make another film about gangs, it would not be impossible to find a distributor, but it would be difficult." By 1997, Itami's next project was rumored to be about the relationship between the Gotogumi, the gang that attacked him a few years earlier, and Soka Gakkai, a huge Japanese religious group. In December of that same year, Itami was found dead after jumping from the roof of his office building. It was later revealed that his death came just 2 days before the scheduled release of a news article that accused him of cheating on his wife, actress Miyamoto Nobuko. On his desk, there was a note that read, "My death is the only way to prove my innocence. I cannot find any other means to prove that there was nothing." The suicide note was also accompanied by a picture of his wife on a computer screen. People close to Itami, including his own family, were incredibly suspicious of his alleged suicide. The director was well known for mocking Japanese traditions, and yet he chose the very traditional Japanese way of ending one's own life in order to preserve one's honor. Itami also mentioned before that he considered affairs to be something natural. Not to mention that the note, instead of being written by hand, was printed out. Couple that with Itami's public criticisms of the Yakuza, and this whole thing does indeed seem kind of suspicious. Officially though, the police ruled Itami's death as a suicide, while his wife and actress Miyamoto Nobuko remained under police protection for 20 years. Nowadays, Yakuza movies, especially good ones, are kind of rare. One example that I would wholeheartedly recommend, however, is A Family, released on Netflix in 2021. It offers a very realistic depiction of a Yakuza family that, over the past 20 years, had to experience the decline of Japan's underworld firsthand. Nowadays, stories about the Yakuza once again have an audience, an international audience at that, thanks to Sega's legendary video game franchise, known as Ryoga Gotoku, Like a Dragon, or simply Yakuza. These games offer a mix of gripping and intriguing storytelling, mixed with a healthy dose of humor and silliness that is unmatched, not only in video games, but even in movies. 2016's Yakuza 6, The Song of Life, actually came full circle and managed to get none other than Kitano Takeshi to portray a character in the game. That's pretty cool. Even if the Yakuza subgenre of movies will never reach the heights of the 70s, I consider Sega's series of games to be more than a worthy replacement. I mean, they were one of the most quoted and talked about things in my own comments section, and did more than any movie ever did when it comes to inspiring me to start this whole YouTube channel. But I also think it's very important to remember the countless movies that, without a doubt, inspired the Yakuza video game franchise. Are there any Yakuza movies that you enjoyed that I failed to mention? Drop your recommendations in the comments down below. Also, I would like to give a big shout out to all the patrons who support the channel, including Busner. And to all of you who finished the video, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.